The judge's gavel struck the block with a crisp, commanding crack that echoed through the courtroom, but even that authoritative sound couldn't dissolve the tension vibrating under the surface. The air itself felt charged. This wasn't an ordinary legal proceeding. This was the climax of years of brewing resentment, veiled betrayal, reality television illusion, and private wounds finally converging in a single room. For longtime Sister Wives viewers, this moment wasn't just a legal showdown, it was the reckoning they never thought they'd witness. At the center of it all stood Meri Brown, the woman who once served as the emotional backbone of the Brown family, now transformed into its fiercest adversary. Meri entered the courtroom that morning with a presence wholly unlike the soft-spoken, frequently overshadowed personality the audience had grown accustomed to on screen. She wore a sharply tailored navy suit, her hair pulled tightly away from her face, and she held a binder, thick, organized, and decisive in her hands. She radiated a calm, cold sense of purpose, the sort of quiet intensity that signaled she had come not to argue, but to win. Gone was the woman who had once begged for scraps of emotional validation. In her place stood someone fortified, steady, and impossible to dismiss. Across from her sat Kody Brown, shoulders tense, posture defensive, and eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for a foothold that no longer existed. Robyn sat beside him, squeezing his hand so tightly that her knuckles went pale. She scanned the room with frantic energy, her gaze flicking from spectators to the judge, to Meri, as though she feared every new moment might bring fresh disaster. Kody, once the booming patriarch who directed his family like a self-appointed leader, had shrunk inside himself. The confidence that defined him for years seemed to be slipping straight through his fingers. This was the day Meri Brown took her power back. For months, rumors whispered through fan circles and media outlets about a big legal move Meri was preparing behind the scenes. While the spotlight had been fixated on Christine leaving the family and then Janelle stepping away with her own truths, Meri had been working quietly with her attorneys. Paper by paper, email by email, receipt by receipt. And what she assembled was a case Kody couldn't outrun, a case centered on long-term financial manipulation and systemic exclusion. The heart of Meri's lawsuit was simple, brutal, and damning. She alleged that Kody and Robyn had funneled family money earned collectively, money built from years of labor and sacrifice, into assets that benefited only their household. From real estate titles to business investments to income distributed from TLC contracts, Meri claimed she had been shut out of financial decisions and denied her rightful share. She said Kody abused his position as the sole legal head of household, using that authority to reward Robyn financially while allowing the other wives to struggle. Not only that, Meri argued she had been emotionally boxed out, strategically ignored, and systematically erased. But the most devastating move Meri made wasn't emotional. It was practical, evidential. She came with documentation. The moment Meri's attorney stepped forward with the thick, meticulously organized binder of evidence, witnesses said the energy in the courtroom shifted instantly. He placed it on the judge's desk with a weighty thud that seemed to echo, like a symbol of the truth finally landing in plain sight. Inside were years of financial statements, screenshots of text messages, email chains, legal documents, and transaction logs. Every page was a chapter in a long story of mismanagement and favoritism. The judge opened the binder and began reading. Kody shifted uncomfortably, his face tightening with every new page. Robyn's confidence evaporated almost instantly. She leaned toward Kody with hurried whispers, her expression growing paler by the minute. Page after page revealed concerning financial discrepancies, large transfers from family businesses into accounts solely held by Robyn, mortgages taken out of her name with shared funds, unexplained withdrawals aligned suspiciously with major purchases for her household. Not once, in any of the records, did Meri's name appear on the documentation for these decisions, despite being a financial contributor to the family for decades. As the judge read through the material, a hush fell heavily across the room. Supporters of Meri nodded silently, their expressions solemn but vindicated. Others in the gallery looked stunned, almost disbelieving. The glossy TV portrayal of a unified plural family had long been cracking, but now it shattered, publicly and irreversibly. When the judge finally looked up, his gaze went directly to Kody. "Mr. Brown," he began, tone firm and unimpressed, "can you explain why these financial decisions were made without the knowledge or consent of all parties contributing to the family estate?" Kody hesitated. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. He glanced at Robyn for support, but she looked down at her lap. I was trying to make the best choices for the family," he said, voice unsteady. "For which part of the family?" the judge pressed sharply. He didn't answer. Meri's turn to speak came minutes later. And she didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She didn't crumble. She simply told the truth plainly, clearly, and with the weight of years behind her. "I gave my life to this family," she said softly, "from the very beginning. I worked. I raised children. I invested in our businesses. I stayed when others wouldn't have. But at some point, I stopped being part of the we. I wasn't included. I wasn't informed. I wasn't even acknowledged. I wasn't just pushed away, I was erased." The words hit the room like a hammer. Even Kody blinked, taken aback. Outside, the media frenzy was erupting. News outlets gathered, cameras ready, fans shouting support or curiosity. Producers from Sister Wives were barred from filming the actual hearing, but insiders confirmed they were already discussing how to cover the aftermath. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was now a cultural moment, the unraveling of a public facade millions had watched for years. Meri didn't bask in the attention. She didn't pose for cameras or deliver clever quotes. She walked straight to her car, calm and composed, leaving the swarm of reporters shouting behind her. Whatever happened next, she had done her part. But inside the courtroom, the drama was far from over. Following a short recess, the binder was opened again, this time revealing digital communications that painted an even darker picture. Emails in which Meri asked basic questions about family finances and received curt, dismissive replies from Kody, text messages between Kody and Robyn discussing decisions behind Meri's back, and voice recordings where Meri begged for explanations and never received them. The courtroom stiffened when a message from Kody replying "Ask Robyn" to Meri's request for business funds was read aloud. That was the moment the judge's brows lifted, judgment flashing across his face. It was the moment everyone realized Robyn wasn't merely the legal wife. She had been positioned as the gatekeeper of everything. And for Robyn, that was the breaking point. Witnesses described her unraveling in vivid terms, trembling hands, rapid breathing, tears spilling uncontrollably. She clung to Kody's arm, whispering through sobs, "You told me everything was taken care of. You said this was handled." Her breakdown triggered a wave of shock in the room. The judge called for another brief recess so she could regain composure, but her emotional collapse had already delivered a bombshell. Without meaning to, Robyn revealed how much, or how little, she truly knew about Kody's dealings. And then, it was time for Kody to take the stand. Gone was the confident husband whose voice once dominated family discussions. The man who walked to the witness chair looked cornered, disoriented, and weighed down by consequences he never believed he'd face. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice tight. "I never intended to hurt anyone," he began. "I tried to lead with love. I thought I was doing the right thing for my family." It might have worked in a confessional interview on TV. But here, under oath, with receipts stacked against him, the words rang hollow. Meri's attorney launched into a cross-examination that left Kody flustered and fumbling. How many accounts were you managing? Which of them had Meri's name on them? Why did $175,000 get transferred without her knowledge? Why did you remove her from a property deed? Why were decisions made with Robyn and not the others? Kody stumbled through excuses, misunderstanding, spiritual guidance, miscommunication, but never once could he provide a legitimate justification. And when the judge finally asked whether he believed his family structure had truly been equal, Kody hesitated for a painfully long moment before admitting softly, "Not always." That confession lingered in the air like smoke. By the time court was adjourned, The damage had been done. The truth was undeniable. Meri gathered her papers calmly, her expression quiet but steady. "I told the truth," she murmured to her legal team. "The rest isn't mine to carry." And as she stepped outside into the chaos of cameras and questions, she walked with the grounded strength of someone who had finally reclaimed her story and ended an old one. The courtroom was no longer a courtroom. It felt like a pressure chamber ready to implode. Every eye shifted between the witness stand, the defense table, and the women who had once built an entire life around Kody's promises. The judge, who had maintained professional distance throughout most of the hearing, now leaned forward in a way that betrayed both exhaustion and disbelief. He had presided over financial disputes, custody wars, and even a few public interest scandals, but nothing quite like this slow-unfolding catastrophe of secrets and spiritual manipulation. Meri wiped beneath her eyes, not because she was crying, but because she was trying desperately to stay composed. Her voice trembled slightly when she finally leaned toward Janelle and whispered, "It's like everything we didn't want to be real is being dragged into the light all at once." Janelle didn't move at first. She kept her hands clasped, knuckles bone white, like she was anchoring herself to the physical world with sheer force of will. When she did speak, her voice carried that steady resignation of someone who had known the truth long before proof arrived. "We survived it once," she murmured. "Now we have to survive everyone watching it." At the defense table, Kody sat rigid, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles vibrated beneath the skin. Every new revelation chipped more violently against the narrative he'd spent years crafting, the narrative he believed in, the one he weaponized, the one he used to keep control. His attorney whispered aggressively at him, but Kody barely heard him. His focus flicked constantly toward the women, as if their presence offended him, betrayed him, challenged him. The mask he once wore with effortlessness was permanently cracked now, and every time he opened his mouth, the cracks deepened. The prosecutor stepped forward again, a stack of papers in hand, but it was the tone, that cool, surgical precision, that sent fresh ripples through the gallery. "Your Honor, in addition to misfiled income, transferred property, and concealed accounts, we have newly obtained communication records between Mr. Brown and the woman identified earlier." A murmur ran through the seats. They weren't just dealing with emotional betrayal, but documented, calculated intent. Christine stiffened. She knew it was coming. She had always known Kody operated in shadows, but hearing it laid out in chronological order, paper by paper, date by date, was like reliving every suspicion she had stuffed down to survive. She watched the prosecutor lift a single printed page, as if it were the weapon that would end the entire charade. "This message," the prosecutor said, "sent 2 years before the separation filings, includes direct instructions on how she should be categorized in financial records to avoid detection." Gasps. Actual gasps. Even the judge's face hardened. "Mr. Brown," he said slowly, "do you understand the gravity of what is being presented?" Kody didn't answer immediately. His throat bobbed with a swallow, his lips parted, then closed again. For the first time since the proceedings began, he wasn't performing. He was cornered. And he knew it. Janelle exhaled sharply. She had lived through the years when money mysteriously disappeared, when bills suddenly arrived in her name, when explanations never matched the math. She turned toward Christine and whispered, "This is why we were drowning. This is why nothing ever added up." Christine gave a tiny nod, her eyes glistening. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation, painful, brutal confirmation. Meri, who had always carried the emotional burden of keeping peace in a world that offered her none, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "He didn't just lie to us," she whispered. "He architected this." The prosecutor continued, voice unwavering. "Additional documents show her living expenses were covered using funds allocated to the family's shared LLCs. These were funds that should have been distributed among all wives and children." A hush washed over the courtroom. It wasn't just deception anymore. It was strategic exploitation. Kody finally snapped. "You're twisting everything," he erupted, slamming his palm on the table. His attorney jerked backward in alarm. "You don't understand the dynamics. You don't understand what unity requires. I was trying to hold us together." His voice cracked, anger and desperation swirling into something messy and unhinged. The judge lifted a hand sharply. "Mr. Brown."
"Sit down."
But Kody continued, shaking now, his voice rising. "They abandoned me. They turned their backs on the family structure, and now I'm the villain for trying to protect it? For providing? For making sacrifices none of them ever appreciated?" The gallery bristled. Christine's eyes flashed, not with fear, but with the kind of fury that had simmered for years beneath layers of forced obedience. She stood suddenly, her chair scraping loudly. Janelle reached out as if to stop her, but Christine had already stepped forward. "Sacrifice," she said, her voice slicing through the room. "You call deception sacrifice? You call using our names, our credit, our livelihoods for someone we didn't even know existed sacrifice?" Kody froze. The judge's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. "You didn't protect a family," Christine continued, her voice steady, powerful. "You protected your ego. You protected your secrets. You protected a version of yourself no one actually knew." Meri stood beside her. Janelle joined them. 3 women who once spent years competing for scraps of affection now stood united in a single, unshakable front. The courtroom went silent, the kind of silence that feels like the moment before a storm breaks. And then the judge cleared his throat. "We will reconvene after a brief recess," he said, though his voice was tighter than before. "Court is in recess." The gavel struck. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged. But the women didn't flinch. Not anymore. They simply stood there, finally, no longer under Kody's shadow. Kody's words came out polished enough, but his body betrayed him with every passing second. Though he spoke toward the judge, his eyes kept darting sideways toward Robyn, flickering with anxiety and desperation. He barely acknowledged Meri's presence at all. His leg bounced relentlessly under the table, an uncontrollable rhythm of nerves, and his fists gripped the edges of the witness stand as if bracing for an inevitable collision. It was a performance he was trying desperately to hold together, one coded in charm and confidence, but no one in the courtroom was buying it anymore. This wasn't about plural marriage, spiritual callings, or the family narrative he had sold to America. This was about honesty, accountability, and integrity, and Kody's answers simply weren't enough. Robyn sat frozen behind him, her silence louder than any outburst. At first her expression held its usual sadness, the same soft helplessness she had displayed so many times in the past. But as Kody stumbled through his defense, her face changed, slowly, achingly, from sorrow to a kind of stunned recognition. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't whisper advice or wipe away performative tears. She just watched him, as if for the very first time understanding that she, too, had been misled, deceived, or perhaps willingly blinded by the story she helped uphold. A courtroom sketch artist later revealed that in one moment, right as Kody admitted he had made several major decisions in secret, Robyn lifted both hands and covered her face. She didn't rise to leave. She didn't defend him. She just sat immobile, shattered. Outside the courthouse, TLC's world trembled. Reporters swarmed in clusters while fans online erupted with hashtags like #RobynBreaksDown, #KodyExposed, and #MeriWinsJustice. Even behind-the-scenes personnel from TLC, according to witnesses, were seen pacing outside, whispering anxiously. Their expressions were tight, worried, perhaps realizing that no amount of editing could turn this disaster into a digestible reality TV storyline. This wasn't manufactured drama. It was devastation. The golden image of the Brown family had collapsed, and now the truth was bleeding out into the public in real time. Through it all, Meri remained impossibly still. She didn't flinch when Kody stumbled through excuses. She didn't smirk when Robyn cracked. She didn't celebrate. She simply sat with her hands folded neatly on the table, her gaze forward, her posture composed. But underneath that stillness, you could feel it, the weight of her truth finally breaking free, the quiet surge of strength she had carried alone for years. She had once been the outsider in her own marriage, pushed aside, ignored, minimized. But today she was being listened to. Today, she stood in the center, not because she needed pity, but because she had found her voice. The judge finally called for a recess, his tone lined with the strain of absorbing so many revelations at once. He looked exhausted, not just legally, but emotionally, as if even he hadn't expected the extent of what had been uncovered. Outside, media vans lined the street. Commentators speculated whether criminal charges might follow if financial misconduct was proven. Detractors and supporters gathered along both sides of the courthouse steps. But one thing united them. A shared understanding that the Kody Brown the public had been sold for more than a decade was gone. Stripped away.
Exposed.
And in his place stood a man who had just lost control of his image, his narrative, and potentially his entire family. When the judge returned to the bench, the air in the courtroom snapped back into silence. His black robe swayed as he took his seat, carrying the weight of justice with him. The room held its breath. This was the moment. After years of emotional turmoil, months of legal arguments, and hours of testimony, when clarity would finally arrive. Every person leaned forward, every eye fixed on the bench. Even Kody's arrogance deflated as the judge shuffled a stack of documents, adjusted his glasses, and then looked directly at him. Then the judge shifted his gaze to Meri, deliberately, respectfully, as if acknowledging the years she had endured before the legal system ever intervened. When he spoke, his voice was steady but firm, delivering the truth without hesitation. After reviewing the testimonies, the financial records, the personal statements, and the observed conduct during these proceedings, this court rules in favor of Meri Brown. The reaction was instantaneous. A wave of gasps rippled across the room. Robyn's hand flew to her mouth as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. Tears flooded her eyes as she leaned instinctively toward Kody, seeking comfort. But he didn't move. He didn't touch her. He didn't even look in her direction. His face had drained of color, his expression hollow. The verdict had pierced straight through him. The judge continued without pause. Mr. Brown, you are ordered to repay all outstanding financial obligations to Meri Brown, including spousal support already owed, the fair division of property as originally agreed upon, and the immediate repayment of the $47,000 spent without her consent. More gasps. A few whispers. Robyn collapsed further into her seat, choking on a sob. The judge wasn't finished. This court also acknowledges the history of emotional abandonment, financial intimidation, and repeated violations of mutual agreements throughout this union. Robyn shook her head in disbelief, whispering, No, this can't be happening. But Meri remained still, serene. Not triumphant, just free. Her hands, which had been tightly clenched around the edge of the bench, finally relaxed. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman who could breathe again. The judge continued outlining procedures and enforcement, but Robyn broke. She shot to her feet, tears streaming, her voice cracking as she cried, You don't understand. He did everything for this family. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to intervene, but the judge calmly lifted a hand. Mrs. Brown, please respect the court. You may sit or choose to step out, but this ruling will not change. Robyn collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands as camera shutters clicked relentlessly. Within minutes, social media would be flooded with images. Robyn Brown in tears as judge rules in Meri's favor. Kody didn't react with tears or shock. He reacted with anger. His arms folded across his chest, his glare shifting from the judge to Meri to the floor. His lawyer murmured advice into his ear, but Kody didn't respond. His pride had taken a blow deeper than the legal one. This wasn't just a courtroom loss. It was the implosion of the image he had spent decades constructing. The judge gave his final statement. This judgment is effective immediately. Asset division must be completed within 60 days. Any attempt to delay or obstruct this ruling will result in further penalties. The gavel slammed, one sharp, final blow that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. And just like that, it was over. But the story was only beginning. The transcripts reveal a courtroom charged with years of buried tension finally exploding into the open. What was once presented as a unified family system slowly unravels as each witness exposes layers of secrecy, financial manipulation, and emotional betrayal. The proceedings begin with Christine, who sits visibly shaken, her posture stiff and controlled. She has endured betrayal before, but this time the revelations cut deeper. As she learns about concealed relationships, hidden financial decisions, and even a secret wife placed quietly in Kody's orbit, the shock drains the color from her face. Christine's pain is not theatrical. It's quiet, sharp, and devastating. Her transformation becomes a centerpiece of the testimony. What began as disbelief hardens into a cold, steady resolve, and the court watches her realize, piece by piece, how thoroughly she was deceived. Janelle's contribution is far different, but no less damaging. Where Christine's testimony is emotional, Janelle's is precise and documented. She steps forward with years of tax filings, LLC paperwork, and financial records that reveal her name was used without full consent. She describes how shared businesses were manipulated, how income was misreported, and how financial burdens were placed unevenly across the family. The evidence paints a picture not of misunderstanding, but of deliberate concealment. Janelle outlines how others received property, upgrades, and advantages while she lived in an RV and struggled financially. Her testimony shifts the courtroom from emotional conflict into potentially criminal territory, raising questions of fraud, liability, and willful deception. Meri brings a quieter but equally devastating layer to the story. Her testimony sheds light on the psychological and spiritual manipulation that occurred behind closed doors. She recounts emails describing Robyn as a spiritual gatekeeper, a role that allowed her to control blessings, emotional access, and status within the family structure. Loyalty and financial offerings were tied to emotional closeness, creating a hierarchy that placed Meri and others in dependent, restricted positions. Meri's voice is steady, but heavy with years of pressure and isolation. Her testimony reveals a system not just of financial imbalance, but of emotional and spiritual dominance. Throughout the transcripts, Robyn emerges as a figure who benefited most from Kody's decisions. Evidence shows she received upgrades, favorable living arrangements, and prioritized resources, while the others sacrificed. When the family moved to Flagstaff, she received a new home outright. While Christine leased, Meri lived alone, and Janelle endured cramped conditions. These choices were not accidental. They formed a pattern of favoritism that threaded through the entire family structure, intensifying the resentment now spilling into the courtroom. The tension reaches a peak when Kody insists on taking the stand against his lawyer's advice. His demeanor shifts instantly. The calm facade cracks, revealing anger, fragility, and defensiveness. He insists that no one truly understood him and claims he only did what he had to do. At moments he appears smug. At others, he trembles with frustration, muttering that everyone wanted him to fail. The judge is forced to warn him to control his temper. His testimony exposes his inability to accept responsibility, and as more documents surface to counter his claims, the pressure visibly weighs on him. One of the most explosive moments involves a name delivered privately to the judge, a name tied to a secret relationship Kody maintained outside the knowledge of most of the family. Christine's reaction is immediate and heartbreaking. She begs silently for it not to be the person she fears, her face going pale. Though her fear is unfounded in that moment, the truth is still devastating. Kody had supported and maintained another woman in secret, fully hidden from the rest of them. This revelation ripples through the courtroom, confirming suspicions long held but never proven. As the testimonies pile up, the courtroom becomes a mirror reflecting the collapse of the family system Kody built. Emotional manipulation, financial discrepancies, concealed partnerships, and unequal treatment intertwine into a single pattern that can no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding or miscommunication. Each woman's individual truth fits perfectly into a larger mosaic of control. The transcripts portray a family empire where one partner was quietly elevated above all others, where resources were distributed based on loyalty and where dissenting voices were minimized through spiritual rhetoric or financial dependence. Outside the courtroom, public reaction grows louder. Social media platforms explode as users dissect leaked emails and snippets of testimony. Every new piece of information fuels speculation, outrage, and sympathy. The trial becomes more than a legal proceeding.